Biodiversity underpins many of the key ecosystem services provided by multifunctional landscapes, including food and water security and human health and well-being. The integration of species protections within planning and development processes is a legal requirement in the United Kingdom under the National Planning Framework and is also a goal of the government's 25-year Environment Plan. Typically, developers are required to identify potential impacts to priority species and habitats during the planning stages of a proposed development. Appropriate action is then required to mitigate these impacts. Furthermore, there will soon be a legal requirement to ensure net gain for biodiversity in any development project. It is, however, only possible to provide mitigation to reduce or remove impacts if the species that will be negatively affected by a proposed development are identified. To many people, knowing where species occur in a landscape might seem like a trivial problem, but for ecologists, it is a fundamental challenge that hampers efforts to protect biodiversity across the globe. During this UKRI Landscape Decisions Fellowship, in a collaboration between ecologists from the University of Exeter's Environment and Sustainability Institute and the Cornwall Wildlife Trust, I will be leading the co-production of software tools to help applied ecologists overcome many of these challenges. The vast majority of biodiversity records are now collected opportunistically, that is, without a statistically rigorous sampling strategy, and these are often collected by citizen scientists. The Global Biodiversity Information Facility currently holds over 1 billion species occurrence records, and at the regional scale, the Environmental Records Centre for Cornwall and the Isle of Scilly currently holds more than 6.5 million occurrence records for this region's species. These records do tend to be biased towards a few particular taxonomic groups, including birds, mammals, Lepidoptera, and vascular plants, and the records also tend to be spatially biased, in particular towards population centres, protected areas, and roads and pathways. But despite these issues, these data do provide an unprecedented insight into the distribution of biodiversity. As an efficient way of identifying the need for mitigation early in the planning process, priority species are often identified through the screening of these occurrence records against planning proposals. However, there are potentially a few problems with this approach. A major issue is that the vast quantities of species records do not necessarily translate into the right information in the right place. Even where the landscape scale distribution of a species is well known, the precise patterns of occupancy at finer scales are typically not known. This is simply because it takes an increasing amount of effort to map species occurrences at increasingly finer resolutions. For example, data for the water vole show that it is distributed across the entire region when measured at a county scale. However, point location records become sparse in many regions as we zoom into a location. Gaps in the raw data reflect ignorance because without further information, the absence of a species record at a location does not necessarily indicate the absence of the species from this location. In this example, is the lack of species records inside the circle an indication that the species doesn't occur here, or simply that no data exists on the species occurrence in this region? Planning decisions are typically made at these finer spatial scales, and ignorance of occupancy patterns at these resolutions is a major obstacle for species protection. To protect biodiversity effectively, reliable information on species distributions is needed at the appropriate scales. We propose that this objective can only be achieved by integrating species occurrence information into planning processes using a species distribution modelling framework. Correlative species distribution models take a sample of species occurrence records and data on the environmental conditions across the landscape and estimate the suitability of sites for species within the landscape as a function of the environmental conditions. There are many different modelling methods used, but all have the same objective: to build a model to predict the occurrence of a species in locations that have not yet been surveyed. By viewing these data through a modelling framework, we are forced to formalise our assumptions and be clear about what we are estimating. Ultimately, we create an auditable workflow which helps to maximise transparency in planning processes. Importantly, using a modelling framework enables corrections to be made in our inferences for biases that result from the opportunistic way in which the data were collected. Here I have corrected the spatial sampling bias in the occurrence data by accounting for variation in sampling effort. We are also able to quantify uncertainty on our estimates of species distributions from our models. Thus, through our modelling approach, we would aim to estimate the likelihood of the water vole occurring in this landscape, which would provide a more evidence-based assessment of the need for mitigation. Through this Landscape Decision Fellowship, I will lead the co-production of a user-friendly software tool to implement field-scale species distribution modelling and mapping based on local biodiversity records. The project will translate modern species distribution modelling capabilities from the academic literature to the planning and development sector. Component 1 involves the production of the software package. The package will capture the practitioner's species-specific expert knowledge to build models, but automate the modelling process itself, including the acquisition and processing of spatial data and the optimization and evaluation of the models. The software will be co-developed with data managers and scientists from the Environmental Record Centre for Cornwall and the Isle of Scilly to ensure the development of a user-friendly package that integrates with existing biodiversity record databases. The R package will be available for download. Component 2 involves the design of species distribution information packages. The production of easily interpretable outputs is critical, and this will be developed in close collaboration with relevant end users and stakeholders to ensure that there is clarity and confidence in the outputs. Data products currently supplied by accredited environmental record centres include information on priority species recorded within a buffered region of a proposed development site. We propose that this same information is now augmented by modelled maps of species occurrence based on species records and expert information, along with information on uncertainty and model skill. The augmented information package will provide the planning authorities with the best available information for making planning decisions. The close collaboration with the Environmental Records Centre for Cornwall and the Isle of Scilly in the co-production of these two components will ensure not only the suitability of this toolset for adding value to Cornwall's biodiversity records, but also the efficient integration of the software with biological record centres across the UK and globally. Furthermore, the software will be freely available for download to facilitate the widespread distribution of this modelling and mapping capability. So thank you for listening to my talk. I'd like to thank the funders and collaborators for facilitating this research, and I look forward to updating you on the progress of this project in the near future.